I know how this sounds, but hear me out. My family has always been complicated. Growing up, my parents weren't the nurturing kind. They did the bare minimum and expected lifelong gratitude in return. My dad, Tom, loved to act like some self-made genius, always reminding me how lucky I was to have him as a father. My mom, Susan, was a master of guilt trips, constantly reminding me of her sacrifices right before asking for something. They weren't physically abusive, but the mental exhaustion of being around them was suffocating. Everything was about them. Any favor came with strings attached. Any success of mine was credited to their push, and every failure was proof. I didn't listen. No matter what I did, I was never enough, especially compared to my younger brother, Jake. Jake, the golden boy, could do no wrong. He was 4 years younger and had been spoiled his entire life. While I was expected to get a job at 16, help around the house, and keep my grades up, Jake got to coast. My parents made endless excuses for him. He's still figuring things out. He's just a kid. Never mind that he was now 22, still living at home, barely working, and spending all his time gaming or with his girlfriend Megan. At 25, I thought I'd escaped. I got married, moved across town, and started my own life. For a while, it was great. My ex and I didn't have kids, which made things easier when the marriage fell apart, but the divorce still left me financially wrecked. I couldn't afford rent alone, and with no close friends or family willing to take me in, I had to do the one thing I swore I'd never do: move back home. It was supposed to be temporary, just a few months to save up and get back on my feet. But months stretched into a year, and suddenly, I was back in my teenage nightmare. My dad resumed his daily lectures on how I needed to get my act together, conveniently forgetting that I was already working a part-time job and picking up freelance gigs. When I was your age, I already had a house, he'd say, as if housing prices hadn't changed since the 80s. Mom wasn't much better. She had a way of turning every conversation into a passive-aggressive jab. If I did something wrong in her eyes, she'd sigh. Well, at least we raised Jake right. She never missed a chance to compare us, even though Jake was doing nothing with his life. Jake, for his part, didn't care about the tension. He was in his room most of the time, gaming with his headset on, blasting music, or scrolling through his phone. If he spoke to me, it was usually to make a snide remark about how I needed to chill out or get my life together. The breaking point came 2 weeks before Christmas. I came home from work exhausted, ready to collapse on the couch, only to find suitcases everywhere. My parents and Jake were buzzing around, packing. "What's going on?" I asked. Dad barely glanced up. "Oh, we're leaving for Italy tomorrow." I froze. "Italy? Since when?" Mom gave me a look like I'd just asked the dumbest question in the world. "Since we planned it weeks ago. We wanted to spend Christmas somewhere special this year." Jake's been so excited. I blinked, still trying to process. "So, you're all going?" "Of course," Dad said. "It's a family trip." Family trip. The words hit like a slap. "So, I'm not invited?" Mom shrugged. "We didn't think you'd want to come. And honestly, with how things have been, we didn't think you could afford it." Jake, who had been sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone, smirked. "Yeah, and it's not like you've been easy to be around lately. It took everything in me not to lose it." "You could have at least told me," I said. Dad sighed, already tired of the conversation. "Look, it's not a big deal. Maybe if you got your act together, we'd have considered paying for your ticket. But you didn't. So, next year, maybe, next year." As if I'd want to spend another year in this house. As if I'd ever want to go anywhere with them again. The next morning, they left without so much as a goodbye. I sat in the empty house, staring at the wall, trying to wrap my head around it. It wasn't just about the trip, it was the final proof of something I had spent years trying to ignore. I had always been second to Jake. I had always been the afterthought. No matter how much I tried, I would never be an equal in their eyes. I told myself it didn't matter. It was just one Christmas, right? But as the day went on, it sank in just how much it did matter. Christmas morning was weird. I woke up and, for a second, forgot it was even Christmas. No smell of breakfast cooking. No holiday music. Just silence. I wandered into the kitchen, stared at the empty coffee pot, and thought, is this it? I ended up eating a bowl of cereal at the dining table, staring at the spot where the Christmas tree should have been. They hadn't even put one up this year, apparently. Italy was all the holiday spirit they needed. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through my phone, but that only made it worse. Social media was flooded with Christmas posts, friends opening presents, coworkers showing off their decorated living rooms, even random acquaintances posting videos of their dogs in Santa hats. Then there was my family. They didn't waste any time uploading pictures from Italy. The first one I saw was of Jake standing in front of the Colosseum, wearing a ridiculous Santa hat. His caption, "Best Christmas ever." Next was a shot of my parents at some fancy outdoor cafe, grinning with glasses of sparkling water. Mom's caption, "Making memories with my favorite people." Favorite people. Yeah. Message received loud and clear. By lunchtime, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to the only place open, a fast food drive-thru. Sitting in my car, eating a burger, I watched other families in their cars. At one point, I saw a little kid in the back seat of a minivan, holding up a new toy, grinning as his parents laughed. And I don't know, it hit me. Not jealousy, not even anger, just this deep, empty realization. No one in my own family had even asked how I was spending Christmas. When I got back, I tried to salvage what was left of the holiday. I put on Home Alone because irony and tried to get into the Christmas spirit, but it felt forced. The pictures kept coming. My dad posing in front of some famous fountain, Jake holding a plate of food the size of his head, my mom raving about the breathtaking view from their villa. By evening, I'd hit rock bottom. I ate some bland leftovers, sitting alone at the kitchen table, thinking about all the times I'd gone out of my way for them. The birthdays, I'd helped Mom plan. The weekends I'd spent fixing things around the house for Dad. The countless times I'd covered for Jake when he screwed up. And this was how they repaid me, leaving me behind, without a second thought. I finally broke down and called my old friend, Mike. I hadn't spoken to him much since moving back in with my parents. I didn't want to explain why I was back in town, but I needed to talk to someone. When he picked up, I tried to sound normal, but he could tell something was wrong. "Hey man," he said. "Merry Christmas. How's it going?" I hesitated. Yeah, same to you. It's fine. Just a quiet day." "Quiet? What about your folks?" I could have lied, but I was too tired. "They're in Italy," I said flatly. "Left last week." A long pause. "Wait, what? You didn't go with them?" "Nope, they didn't invite me." Mike let out a low whistle. "Damn, dude, that's cold." "Yeah," I said, laughing bitterly. "Tell me about it." We talked for a while. Old memories, dumb jokes. Anything to keep my mind off this disaster of a Christmas. But that pit in my stomach didn't go away. Something had to change. And for the first time, I started thinking about what I wanted for my life. I thought things would settle down after Christmas. The first mean, how much worse could it get? My parents had already left me behind without a second thought. Surely, they wouldn't have the nerve to make things even worse when they got back. I was wrong. A couple of days after their return, I was sitting in the living room, trying to stay out of their way. I had no interest in hearing about the best Christmas ever, for the millionth time. But of course, my dad decided it was time for a family meeting. A family meeting in our house never meant an open discussion. It meant they had decided something, and I was about to be told what I needed to do. Dad leaned forward, his usual self-important expression on his face. "We've got something important to talk about." I already knew where this was going before he even said it. "It's about your brother," he continued. "Of course it was. Jake proposed to Megan while we were in Italy," Mom added, practically glowing with pride. "It was beautiful. They're so happy." I barely managed to nod. Congrats, I guess." Jake, who had been lounging on the couch, smirked like he had just won the lottery. "Yeah, we're planning a spring wedding. It's going to be amazing." I clenched my jaw. I hadn't even known Megan had gone on the trip with them, and now they were all acting like this was the biggest event of the year. Dad leaned back, folded his arms, and hit me with it. "We're going to need your help with the wedding expenses." I blinked. "Wait, what?" Mom jumped in, all sweetness and fake concern. "It's not just you, honey. We're all pitching in. But weddings are expensive, and Jake and Megan are young. They don't have the resources yet." Jake nodded like this was all perfectly reasonable. "Yeah, we're still figuring things out. It would mean a lot if you could contribute." I stared at them. "How much are we talking about here?" Dad waved a hand like he was asking for pocket change. "Oh, not much. Just $17,000. I laughed. I couldn't help it. $17,000? You're joking." Mom tilted her head, like I was the one being unreasonable. "It's not just for Jake. It's for family. Weddings are a big deal. You've been through one yourself, so you know how it is. That stung more than I wanted to admit. My own wedding had been a disaster, not because of money, but because of the relationship itself. And now, they expected me to feel honored to cough up what little I had left so Jake and Megan could have their fairy tale moment. Look, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't have that kind of money. And even if I did, why would I spend it on this? You guys just got back from a luxury vacation. Maybe cut back instead of asking me to cover the bill. Jake finally spoke up, his tone smug. Wow, way to be supportive. This isn't just about me and Megan, it's about family. You wouldn't even be living here if it weren't for Mom and Dad. You kind of owe them. That was it, I owe them? I snapped. Are you serious? I've been paying rent since I moved back. I cover bills. I help around the house. Meanwhile, you sit here doing nothing. Mom's face soured. That's not fair, and you know it. We've done so much for you, especially after your divorce. The least you can do is show some gratitude. Gratitude? I practically laughed. I'm grateful, sure. But I'm not a bank. You can't just guilt me into handing over money I don't have. Dad shook his head, disappointment written all over his face. We've been patient with you, but this attitude isn't going to get you anywhere. For a second, the room was dead silent. I thought maybe they'd drop it. Then Mom leaned forward, giving me that pitying look. Honey, think about it this way, you're single. You don't have kids to worry about. No spouse to support. It's not like you have any major expenses. That hit harder than I wanted to admit. They made it sound like my life was worthless just because I wasn't married with kids. Like I wasn't allowed to save for myself. Like I wasn't allowed to have my own plans. I muttered under my breath. Unbelievable. Then I stood. No, I'm not giving you $17,000. Not for this. Not for anything. Mom gasped like I had slapped her. How can you be so selfish? This is for Jake. For family. I'm not selfish, I shot back. You are. You've spent my whole life putting him first. And now, you expect me to fund his wedding? No way. As I turned to leave, Dad's voice went cold. If that's how you feel, then we need to reevaluate the arrangement here. I froze in the doorway. You're living under our roof, he continued, and we've been more than generous. Maybe it's time you start paying your fair share of rent. I clenched my jaw. I already pay rent. Not enough, he said. If you're not going to contribute to the wedding, then you can contribute more here. Let me get this straight. If I didn't give them money for Jake, they were going to punish me by making me pay more rent. Mom nodded, calm and self-righteous. It's only fair. You've been here long enough. It's time to step up. I didn't even respond. I just walked out of the room and slammed the door to my tiny bedroom. My heart was pounding. My mind was racing. How had it come to this? How had I ended up back in this house, stuck in this toxic cycle? I thought moving back was the right thing to do, save money, get back on my feet, and move on. But now, they were weaponizing my situation against me. They expected me to cough up 17 grand for Jake's wedding, and when I said no, they decided to punish me for it. It wasn't even about the money anymore. It was about control. They had always used guilt and manipulation to keep me in line, and now that I was standing up for myself, they didn't know how to handle it. But something inside me shifted. I was done being their doormat. They could call me selfish, ungrateful, whatever they wanted. I didn't care anymore. My answer was no, and it was going to stay that way. After that conversation, something inside me snapped. I had spent my whole life bending over backward for them, trying to prove that I was worth just as much as Jake. And for what? So they could treat me like an ATM and punish me when I refused? No more. I needed to get out. The problem was, I wasn't in a position to just pack up and leave. Rent wasn't cheap, and after my divorce, my finances were still a mess. But staying wasn't an option anymore. If I didn't figure something out soon, they'd keep finding new ways to tighten their grip on me. And just when I thought they couldn't get any worse, Mom cornered me in the kitchen a few days later. She sat down across from me, smiling in that fake, sweet way she did when she was about to say something ridiculous. I've been thinking. I didn't look up from my sandwich. That's never a good sign. She ignored the jab. You've got that car sitting outside, and it's in really nice shape, isn't it? I frowned. Yeah? Why? Her smile widened. Well, you don't really need it, do you? I mean, you work from home most of the time, and when you go out, it's not like you're driving far. What if you sold it and put that money toward Jake and Megan's wedding? I stared at her. You're joking. She shook her head, completely serious. It would make such a difference. And we could all help you get a cheap used car later on if you really needed one. I set my sandwich down. Wait, let me get this straight. You want me to sell my car, my only car, so Jake and Megan can have their dream wedding? Mom nodded, like this was the most reasonable suggestion in the world. It's not just for them, it's for family. You'd be helping out so much. Besides, think about how much money you'd get for it. It's a nice car. One couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mom, I said, keeping my voice steady, I need that car. It's not just for work. It's my only way to get anywhere. I'm not selling it. Her smile faded. You're being so short-sighted. This is an opportunity to show Jake and Megan how much you support them. Family helps family, you know? I scoffed. Oh, do they? Because I seem to remember spending Christmas alone while you were off in Italy. Her face twisted. That's not fair, no, I cut her off, standing up. What's not fair is you expecting me to sacrifice everything while Jake does nothing. I'm not selling my car, and I'm done talking about this. She sighed and shook her head like I was being unreasonable. I don't know why you're being so stubborn. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Then she walked out, leaving me sitting there, seething. That was it. That was the moment I decided. I was getting out of this house. I didn't care if it meant scraping by in a tiny apartment. I didn't care if it meant stretching every dollar. I refused to be their puppet any longer. So, I started planning my escape in secret. Every time they brought up the wedding, I nodded along, pretending to listen. But in my head, I was working out my next move. I spent hours searching for apartments, anything even remotely affordable. Most were out of my price range, or so run down, they looked like they'd collapse with a stiff breeze. But eventually, I found a tiny studio on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much. One room, a kitchenette, and a bathroom. But it was mine. When I went to see the place, the landlord looked skeptical. I wasn't exactly rolling in cash, and my credit was still recovering from the divorce. But after I scraped together the deposit and promised to pay the first month up front, he agreed to let me move in. There was one catch. I had to be out of my parents' house and into the new place by the weekend. That gave me 5 days to figure everything out. I couldn't just start hauling boxes to my car in broad daylight. If they saw, they'd demand to know what I was doing. They'd try to guilt me into staying, or worse, they'd make my life miserable until I gave in. So, I did it in secret. Each day, I packed a little at a time, sneaking boxes out whenever no one was around. If Mom was upstairs, or Dad was in the garage, I'd grab a few things and make a quick run to my car. It felt ridiculous, like I was plotting a prison break, but I wasn't taking any chances. By Thursday night, my car was packed with everything I needed. I had the keys to my new place in my pocket. All I had to do was get through one more day without tipping them off. That night, I waited until everyone was asleep before making my final move. I grabbed the last of my things, a couple of bags and a box of random stuff, and quietly carried them out. I sat in my car for a long moment, staring at the dark, silent house. If I tried to explain, they'd twist my words, guilt me into staying, somehow make me feel like the bad guy for wanting my own life. Leaving quietly was the only way to take control. Finally, I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway, careful not to make too much noise. I didn't know what the future held, but at least now, it was mine to figure out. Moving into my new place should have felt like freedom, and in some ways it did. I didn't have to tiptoe around anymore, didn't have to brace myself for guilt trips every time I walked into the kitchen. But my parents weren't about to let me go that easily. It started with texts. Mom, I hope you're doing okay, honey. We miss you. Dad, call me when you get a chance. We need to talk. I ignored them. Then, the messages started coming from other people. Aunts, uncles, old neighbors, people I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly had urgent messages from my parents. Your mom wanted me to check in on you. She's so worried. Your dad asked if you could call him. It's important. I knew their game. They didn't care about me. They just wanted to get their hooks in again. Then, one of my friends, Sarah, forwarded me an email my mom had sent her, thinking it might be urgent. It wasn't. It was just more manipulation. I think about you every day and pray that you're okay. Your father and I have been struggling lately. We've had some unexpected expenses, and it's been hard to keep up. I hate to ask, but if you could help us out financially, it would mean so much. Family always comes first, right? Unexpected expenses. Yeah, right. They'd burned through their savings trying to fund Jake's wedding, and now they wanted me to bail them out. I didn't reply. I wasn't falling for it. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. They had spent my whole life controlling me, and if they couldn't guilt me into staying, they'd find a new way to pull me back in. Cutting them off should have been the end of it. I blocked their numbers, ignored their messages, and stayed off social media to avoid any updates. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. No more walking on eggshells, no more lectures, no more guilt. My tiny studio apartment wasn't much, but it was mine. But peace never lasts when it comes to my family. 2 months after I moved out, I started hearing rumors. I hadn't asked for updates, but people loved to talk, and the wedding was turning into a disaster. Apparently, my parents had promised Jake and Megan this big, extravagant event without actually having the money to back it up. They assumed I'd cave, that I'd feel guilty and hand over a check. When that didn't happen, they scrambled for another solution. First, they went to Megan's parents, asking them to contribute. That conversation didn't go well. Megan's mom shut it down immediately. "If you can't afford a wedding, don't have one," she had said. Honestly, I respected that. Mom, of course, played the victim, complaining to anyone who would listen about how unfair it was that Megan's family wasn't helping. But Megan's parents weren't budging. Meanwhile, Jake was stuck in the middle of it all. He was getting frustrated with Mom and Dad for overstepping, but he wasn't about to tell them no. He never had. He just expected things to work out, which, in our family, usually meant someone else cleaning up his mess. Then, about a month before the wedding, Megan had enough. She gave Jake an ultimatum. Either he set boundaries with my parents, or she was done. She was sick of Mom micromanaging every detail, sick of Dad trying to cut corners, sick of the constant drama. She wanted a partner, not a mama's boy. Jake, of course, chose my parents. He told Megan she was overreacting, that Mom just wanted the best for them. That was the last straw. Megan called off the wedding, packed her things, and moved back in with her parents. It was a complete disaster. My parents weren't mad at Jake. No, that would have required them to hold him accountable. Instead, they were furious at Megan, furious that she had the audacity to walk away after all they had done for her. Mom called her ungrateful. Dad ranted about how women these days don't appreciate family values. Jake, for his part, just moped around acting like he was the victim. 2 weeks after Megan left, I got a call from an unknown number. Normally, I wouldn't answer, but something told me to pick up. It was Megan. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Hey, it's me. I know we were never close, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry." I blinked. "Sorry? For what?" "For everything," she said. "For not standing up for you sooner. For all of it." I didn't know what to say. "I didn't realize how bad it was," she continued. "Not until I was in the middle of it. Your parents are a lot, and Jake just lets them do whatever they want. I thought I could handle it, but I couldn't. I'm sorry they put you through that." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I didn't need her apology, but hearing it was validating. For years, I had been treated like the problem, the selfish one, the ungrateful one. And now here was someone who had been on the other side, telling me I wasn't crazy. "Thanks," I said finally. "I appreciate that." We talked for a little while longer, mostly about the wedding drama and how my parents had tried to control everything. She said she didn't know if she and Jake would work things out, but she didn't sound optimistic. "He's too tied to them," she admitted. "I don't think he knows how to function without their approval." When we hung up, I felt strange. On one hand, I felt bad for Megan. She hadn't deserved to get dragged into my family's mess. But on the other hand, I couldn't help but feel a little vindicated. Maybe now people would start to see my parents and Jake for who they really were. A few days later, I got another call. This time it was from Jake. "Hey," he said awkwardly. "Can we talk?" I sighed. "What do you want, Jake?" I screwed up," he admitted. "Megan left. Mom and Dad are freaking out. I feel like everything's falling apart." I leaned back in my chair, waiting for him to get to the point. "I know I've been a jerk," he said finally. "I should have stood up for you. I should have, I don't know, been a better brother. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." For a second, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to accept his apology, to move on. But another part of me remembered every time he had stood by while our parents treated me like dirt. Every time he had benefited from their favoritism while I was left to fend for myself. "I appreciate the apology," I said finally, "but I'm not ready to forgive you. That's going to take time. A lot of time." Jake sighed. Yeah, I get that. I hope we can fix things someday. Maybe, I said, but not today. For the first time, Jake had acknowledged the damage he had played a part in. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. Still, I wasn't ready to let him or anyone else in my family back into my life. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And as it turned out, cutting them off was about to become a lot easier, because my parents' world was about to completely fall apart. A few months after the wedding disaster, I started hearing whispers. Apparently, things had taken a turn for the worse. It wasn't surprising, really. They had always lived beyond their means. But this time, it was serious. Drowning in debt. Serious. At first, I brushed it off. It wasn't my problem anymore. But then the call started. I had already blocked their numbers, but they started using other people to get messages to me. Your mom wanted me to tell you she's worried about you. Your dad asked if you could call him. It's important. Transparent. Predictable. I wasn't falling for it. Then, Sarah, one of my old friends, forwarded me an email Mom had sent her, thinking it might be urgent. It wasn't. It was classic Mom. I think about you every day and pray that you're okay. Your father and I have been struggling lately. We've had some unexpected expenses, and it's been hard to keep up. I hate to ask, but if you could help us out financially, it would mean so much. Family always comes first, right? Unexpected expenses, right? More like they had set their money on fire trying to throw Jake a wedding he never even got to have. I didn't reply. I wasn't even tempted to. Over the next few weeks, I started hearing details about just how bad things had gotten. They had maxed out multiple credit cards, trying to cover wedding deposits, decorations, and everything else. And when Megan walked away, they lost all the money they had put down. Non-refundable deposits, unpaid balances. They were buried in debt. And to make matters worse, Jake had finally moved out. Turns out, Megan told him that if he ever wanted a chance at fixing things with her, he had to set boundaries with my parents. For once in his life, Jake actually listened. He told Mom and Dad that he couldn't support them financially, that they needed to figure it out themselves. To say they didn't take it well would be an understatement. They're blaming everyone but themselves, Sarah told me over coffee one night. Your mom's been telling people that Megan's family sabotaged the wedding, and that you abandoned them in their time of need. I shook my head. Of course they are. They're allergic to accountability. Then, one day, I got the message I had been waiting for. Your parents are selling the house. Hearing that my parents were selling the house should have shocked me, but it didn't. They had spent years pretending they were more successful than they actually were, living well beyond their means. The wedding disaster had just sped up the inevitable. Still, knowing it was happening made it real. That house had never truly felt like home to me, but it had been the backdrop of my entire life. Now, they were losing it not because of some unavoidable tragedy, but because of their own greed, arrogance, and terrible financial decisions. And for once, I wasn't the one cleaning up their mess. I didn't reach out. I didn't ask how they were doing. I didn't offer to help, but they weren't about to let me go that easily. A month after I found out they were selling, my dad showed up at my apartment. I hadn't told them where I lived. I had been careful about that. But there he was, standing outside my door, looking more exhausted than I had ever seen him. Gone was the overconfident, self-important man who always had something to say. He looked desperate. I hesitated, then stepped outside and shut the door behind me. I wasn't letting him in. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "We're in trouble." I crossed my arms. "And your mom and I were behind on the mortgage. The credit card companies won't stop calling. We don't know what to do." I stared at him, waiting for the inevitable. "You're our son," he continued, his voice quieter than usual. "We thought you might want to help." And there it was. I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Help? Like you helped me when I was struggling? Like you included me in your Italy trip? Like you cared about my feelings when you tried to make me pay for Jake's wedding?" Dad's jaw tightened. "Don't be like that, we're family." "Exactly," I said coldly. "And funny how family only seems to apply when it benefits you." For a moment, he just stared at me, like he couldn't believe I was actually saying no. Then, he tried a different tactic. "What about the house?" he asked. "It's your childhood home. Don't you care about what happens to it?" That one stung, but I didn't let it show. "It stopped feeling like home a long time ago," I said. "Good luck selling it." And with that, I turned and walked back inside, locking the door behind me. After that, I didn't hear from them again. Not directly anyway, but the fallout was impossible to ignore. The house sat on the market longer than they expected, and when it finally sold, it was for way less than they had hoped. They had poured so much money into keeping up appearances that they hadn't actually invested in anything valuable. The place needed repairs, and buyers weren't lining up to overpay for a sinking ship. In the end, they walked away with just enough to cover their debts, but not enough to keep up their old lifestyle. They had to move into a small rental on the other side of town. Nothing fancy, nothing impressive, just an average, run-down place that didn't scream success. For people like my parents, that was worse than being homeless. The funny thing is, they could have avoided all of this if they had just been decent people, if they had saved money instead of spending it on luxury vacations, if they had treated me like a son instead of a backup plan, if they had let Jake stand on his own 2 feet instead of carrying him his whole life, they wouldn't have ended up here. But they did, and I felt nothing. No sympathy, no guilt, no urge to step in and save them. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. A few weeks after they moved, I ran into Jake. It wasn't planned. I was grabbing coffee before work, and he just appeared. He looked different. Not in a dramatic way, but enough that I noticed. Less smug, more tired. He hesitated before walking up to me. "Hey." I took a sip of my coffee. "Hey." There was a long pause. "Mom and Dad are pissed at you," he finally said. "They think you abandoned them." I smirked. "Yeah? And what do you think?" He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I think they did it to themselves." That was unexpected. I raised an eyebrow. "You finally seeing it?" Jake let out a short, humorless laugh. "Hard not to when you're living it." I waited. "They're miserable," he admitted. "They don't know how to function without money to throw around. Mom keeps blaming Megan. Dad keeps talking about our building. But it's over. They lost everything, and it's their fault." I took another sip of my coffee, letting his words settle. Then he looked at me, really looked at me. "You were right." That caught me off guard. "About what?" "All of it," he said. "About the way they treated you. About how they always expected everyone else to fix their mistakes." I didn't want to see it, but I do now. I studied him, searching for some sign of manipulation, some angle he might be working. But there was nothing. Just a guy who had finally pulled his head out of the sand. "Too little, too late," I said, not unkindly. Jake nodded. "Yeah, I know." Another pause. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, "but I want to fix things. If you ever feel like talking, I'm here." For the first time in my life, Jake wasn't looking at me like an afterthought, like an obstacle, like someone he could just use. I didn't know if I would ever take him up on it, but it was nice to know the option was there. I gave him a small nod. "We'll see." Jake didn't push. He just nodded back, then turned and walked away. I stood there for a while, watching people come and go, sipping my coffee, letting the moment sink in. For so many years, I had let my family dictate my worth. I had bent over backward, desperate for their approval. I had let their guilt trips and manipulation define my choices, but not anymore. I was finally living my own life, and it felt damn good. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for the next disaster. I wasn't dreading the next guilt trip, the next demand, the next moment when I'd have to defend my right to exist on my own terms. I was just living. The weight I had carried for years, the need to prove myself, to earn love that should have been unconditional, was gone. And honestly, it felt strange at first. I wasn't used to waking up and only worrying about myself. I wasn't used to going through a day without my parents' expectations looming over me. But slowly, that feeling turned into something else. Relief. A few months passed, and life settled into something good. I picked up more freelance work, enough to make rent without stress. My apartment, tiny as it was, finally felt like home. I even reconnected with old friends, people I had lost touch with when I was too busy managing my parents' drama. And through all of it, I stayed no contact. No texts, no calls, nothing. They had spent years making me feel like I needed them, like I would always come crawling back. But I didn't. I had escaped, and I wasn't stupid enough to walk back into the fire. That didn't stop them from trying, though. It started small messages through other people, the occasional accidental email from Mom that was clearly meant to guilt me. "I pray for you, every day. I just don't understand how you could turn your back on us. Family should stick together." no matter what. We love you, even if you don't love us anymore. I never responded. Then, when they realized guilt wasn't working, they switched tactics. Desperation. A cousin mentioned at a family gathering that my parents were struggling badly. Dad had lost his job. Mom's attempts at side gigs weren't paying the bills. They had downsized to the rental, but even that was becoming hard to manage. The house was gone. The savings were gone. And suddenly they needed me again. My cousin, not knowing the full story, told me, "I think they just want to make things right. Maybe you should talk to them." I almost laughed. I had spent years begging them to treat me like I mattered. And now, they wanted me to fix things? No, not again. The real test came when Dad showed up one last time. I was walking out of my building when I saw him. He looked rough, older, worn down, a man who had spent too much time clinging to a life that had crumbled beneath him. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off before he could start. "I'm not giving you money," I said flatly. He flinched. "That's not—" "Yes, it is," I interrupted. "That's always what it is with you. And I'm done." Dad's face twisted, like he couldn't believe I was actually saying no to him. "We're struggling, you know." "I know," I said. "And it's not my problem." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "We raised you. You think you got here on your own?" I met his glare without hesitation. "I got here in spite of you." That hit him hard. For the first time, he had no comeback, no lecture, no guilt trip that could manipulate me into feeling bad for him. I waited for him to try again, but he just stood there, his pride crumbling alongside his failed attempts at control. Finally, he exhaled, defeated. "I hope you can live with yourself," he muttered. I smiled. "I finally can." Then I walked away, leaving him standing there. And just like that, it was over. I never saw them again, not in person at least. I still heard things through the family grapevine, how they had burned so many bridges, that no one wanted to help them. How Mom tried to spin the story to make herself the victim. How Dad never really bounced back after losing the house. Jake, he kept his distance. He reached out every now and then, small texts, casual check-ins, but I never let him get too close. He had made his choices. He had stood by while I was treated like an outsider in my own family. An apology didn't erase years of silence. Maybe one day we'd be able to rebuild something real. But that day wasn't now, and that was okay. One night as I sat in my apartment sipping coffee and listening to music, it hit me. I was happy. Not just not miserable, not just surviving. I was actually happy. For years I had been stuck in this cycle, chasing validation from people who would never give it to me. But I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their acceptance. I was free. And that was worth more than anything they had ever taken from me. Story 2. My cousin unjustly accused me of abuse is the title of this narrative. After I was expelled, my parents took away my education funds and handed them to her. However, now that the truth is out, they wish to make amends. Hello everyone. Prior to the start of today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe. Since we've observed, the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. All right, Reddit. I really need to let go of this narrative since I've been holding on to it for far too long. A fair caution. This is going to be a lengthy one. And to be honest, it still feels strange to type this, but whatever, I suppose. For background, I'm a 24-year-old man who had what most people would consider a respectable life until around 2 years ago. It's comfy, but nothing really noteworthy. My parents had a modest company that functioned as a local supply chain. I do not wish to be overly specific. Even though we weren't wealthy or anything, they made enough money for me to never worry about little things like some of my friends did. Before I get started, I should quickly clarify that although this is my primary account, I use fictitious identities for clear reasons. I don't want to experience any more turmoil than I have already. I intentionally grew up being evasive in this Midwestern medium-sized metropolis. Apologies. Everyone knew each other in the normal suburban community where we resided. Following my parents, let's call them Dan and Amy, I used to play video games with my pals in our simple 4-bedroom home with a respectable backyard. To be honest, we're quite cool. Despite their hard labor, they always found time for their family. Things like Amy somehow managed to attend all of my school functions while managing their business, and Dan would assist me with my math assignments while working 12-hour days. In retrospect, I realized how much I had taken for granted that steadiness. However, my cousin will be the subject of this narrative. I'll refer to her as M. Her father, my Uncle Jake, passed away in a vehicle accident when we were around 8 years old, so we essentially grew up together. She is my age, having been born 3 months apart. Kate, her mother, after Jake's death, she sort of disappeared, began discovering who she was, or whatever, which essentially meant leaving M with us while she and her yoga pals explored Europe. Man, this whole situation becomes even more chaotic when one considers how many there used to be. We were practically siblings. Almost every day after school, she would come over and we would play Pokemon on our DS and complete our schoolwork together. Yes, I was extremely cool back then, and I'm dating myself here, just hanging out. When I sneaked out to see friends, she would act as my cover, and I would assist her in handling the drama. When Kate would emerge out of the blue, pretend to be a mother for a week, and then vanish once again, M's parents essentially took on the role of second parents. They had her a room at our house, bought her school supplies, took her on our family trips, even got her braces when Kate neglected to send money for M. Despite the additional costs, Dan and Amy never voiced any complaints. They just cared for her as if she were their own child. In middle school, I recall this one instance. M was scheduled to appear in this major school production. She played a key role, and weeks were spent practicing. Surprise, surprise, Kate never showed up for the flight she said she would take to see it. Backstage, M was fighting the need to cry, but I could see she was going to lose. My mom basically left everything she had at work, hurried to the school, and sat in the front row, using her iPad to capture the entire event. That's the sort of thing that drives me insane about this whole issue. As if we were true family, not just friends you visit at Christmas, but true relatives. M was aware of all my humiliating tales. I was aware of all her secrets. All the other people were annoyed by our inside jokes. I wasn't a great child or anything, but I did work summer jobs at this local game store because I wanted to play a lot of video games, even though my parents had enough money for college and other things. If you ask my mother, there were probably too many. I did okay in school, but I didn't have any kind of stellar grades. Really, just a regular man. M, on the other hand, was constantly at the top of our class and was actually quite intelligent back then. It's kind of clever. She had the ability to simply recall anything she read. Her teachers adored her. Everyone assumed she would wind up doing something divine at some prestigious university. Writing all of this down is strange. It's been ages since I gave the happy times any thought. To be honest, I've been attempting to forget everything. H. It's funny how things change. Around the junior year of high school, everything began to change. Since her mom, Kate, was away doing whatever with husband number 3, or perhaps number 4, M was still living with us the majority of the time. At this point, I honestly lost track. Haha. However, something had changed. My initial observation was that M had become somewhat strange when it came to social networking. Like, truly strange. To upload one selfie, she would spend hours taking hundreds, and then she would compulsively monitor how many likes she received in comparison to other females at school. She once sobbed because a random influencer's post had more interaction than hers. I recall. She yelled at me. I don't understand, when I attempted to explain that it wasn't a huge problem. After that, she began to socialize with these new girls. You are aware of the kind. Those whose parents had expensive automobiles and who were constantly boasting about their luxury possessions. M began returning home and complaining about how humble our home was. It was the same house where she essentially grew up, by the way, and how humiliating it was that my mother continued to buy at Target. The most bizarre aspect was that M began to fabricate these wild tales about her mother. For example, pretending that Kate was a successful entrepreneur who traveled the world and made deals, while, in fact, she was only bouncing between yoga retreats and spending the remaining funds from Uncle Jake's life insurance. Although it was embarrassing to watch her lie to everyone, my parents never chastised her since they didn't want to make her feel bad. The financial situation became quite serious, and I would take my mother's clothing and accessories and never give them back. began requesting pricey gifts for her birthday and Christmas, followed by these outbursts, should she not receive precisely what she desired. When my parents gave her the standard iPhone rather than the Pro Max model, she once actually stopped talking to them about it. Who does that? However, her involvement in this strange eye-painting stuff was what really started to frighten me. It appeared to be rather benign at first. She was editing her images, using these programs to make them more visually appealing or whatever. She became fixated with these deepfake films, though, and I would spend hours in her room playing with them. I recall hearing her chuckle as I passed her room one evening when she was chatting on Discord with her new pals. They were making jokes about how they could truly wreck someone's life with this technology. At the time, I didn't give it much thought. God, I wish I had assumed it was simply normal, edgy adolescent fare. The fact that she began exploiting people's images without their consent is the most problematic aspect. She would, for example, use these eye tools to do strange adjustments on photos she took during our family gatherings or parties. To be honest, some of them were really unsettling. When my mom saw some on her laptop, she tried to discuss it with her, but she just responded that we didn't have the same understanding of digital culture and that she was just working on her art. She also had the strange habit of constantly posing in family pictures, such that she appeared to be the primary figure who would lose her cool if she wasn't in the center. She would then share these heavily altered photos, with everyone else cut or blurred out, but she had the ideal appearance. When my dad asked whether the rest of us were only non-player characters in her game, he attempted to make a joke out of it. It was 3 days before she spoke to him again. The eerie thing. I saw her stealing pictures of me while I wasn't looking, like when I was playing games or doing my schoolwork. I questioned her about it. She would always be prepared with an excuse. Oh, I'm working on a school assignment or a family photo album. However, no record ever came out, and she never showed me these efforts. I attempted to discuss with my parents how strange she was becoming, but they dismissed it as typical adolescent female behavior and suggested that she was most likely simply having difficulties as a result of her mother's absence. They felt awful about her dad's death and her mom's lack of value, so they kept creating excuses for her. When the senior year arrived, things truly took a turn for the worst. I must admit that I was rather enthusiastic when everyone was discussing their intentions for college. Since I was born, my parents had been accumulating money for my education fund. Not a huge trust fund or anything, but enough to allow me to attend a good school without being indebted. In order to help me understand how saving worked, they were always very open and honest with me, giving me the account statements and everything. This is where I made a mistake. Em and I were playing Smash Bros. Together one evening in our game area in the basement, as we did when we were children. When she inquired about my intentions for college, I didn't hesitate to answer her because she appeared more relaxed than she has been in months. My parents had saved around $80,000 for college, I informed her. Knowing what happened to the number makes me shudder every time I type it out. Em became very silent, which ought to have been my first clue. She then began to inquire about the narrative in great detail. Where did it take place? Was my name involved? When will I be able to access it? Such things. Her next statement was so strange that I can still clearly recall it. It must be pleasant to have parents who genuinely think for your future, rather than squandering all of your dad's life insurance funds on Bali yoga getaways. I made an effort to be understanding, suggested that she apply for financial aid or scholarships, and even offered to help her find part-time work so she could begin saving money. She just looked at me. She seemed to be staring through me rather than at me, and I'm not sure how to explain it. After that, she began to complain about how unfair everything was, and how her mother had promised to help with college, but had instead used the entire amount for her new husband's company. Warning: all of them were frauds. Despite treating her like family, my parents never considered setting aside money for her college education. How I just received OK marks and wasn't particularly intelligent. Thus, I didn't deserve the money, because I was supporting my poor orphan relative, and my instructors felt terrible for me. Not mine, but hers. At that time, I became rather irate. Considering that my parents had essentially raised her for free, I informed her that she was being ungrateful. A huge error. A huge error. I assumed she simply needed some time to calm down after she stormed out of the basement. I resumed my game and emailed Sarah, my girlfriend, about getting together later. Sarah was meant to play a significant role in my future. We were intending to attend the same college and had been dating since our sophomore year. Emma always joined us for breakfast, so it seemed strange that she wasn't there the next morning. Mom claimed to have departed early in order to finish a school assignment. In retrospect, she was most likely already putting her plan into action. The entire school day seemed strange. When I passed by, people were muttering and giving me strange glances. I texted Sarah, but she didn't respond. I reasoned that perhaps some stupid rumor was circulating. High school is like that, but compared to other high school dramas, this was far worse. I had no idea what was waiting for me when I arrived home that day. A brief message. This section is rather difficult to write. A few pauses were necessary. This stuff still hurts hard even after 2 years. Everyone was in our living room as I entered. I hadn't seen my parents, Emma and her mother, Kate, for around 8 months. However, even Sarah's parents were sobbing on the couch while Kate held her, which was somewhat remarkable given that Kate hadn't cared about her in years. The place fell quiet as soon as I entered. You know how it feels to enter a room and realize that everyone is talking about you? Yes. Take it and multiply it by 1,000. I recall asking, "What's happening?" like some jerk in a scary film. Em began to sob more intensely. In retrospect, her acting abilities were rather remarkable. Ingle. My mother refused to give me a glance. With his head in his hands, my dad simply sat there. Kate then took out her iPad. She prepared the entire presentation. I'm shocked that you haven't shown everyone these Discord servers where AI-generated photographs were being traded, which I had allegedly been a part of. She had screenshots of discussions regarding utilizing EMS photographs that appeared to be from my accounts. She also had fictitious bank statements that purportedly showed transactions from my cryptocurrency wallets. The worst thing? This item seems authentic, like frightful, actual. Em was an expert at making things appear authentic, since she had spent months studying how to utilize these AI tools. She also inserted minor details like inside jokes we used to share, making the false talk seem just like how I truly type. "What did you do?" Dad inquired. Em had considered everything she said, even though I attempted to clarify that none of it was true and that I didn't even know how to use the most of this computer stuff. My cover was that. So in order to avoid suspicion, I feigned a lack of its skills. She even turned my interest of gaming against me by claiming that I got all of this knowledge from dark web gaming communities. Sarah was also present, had been with Em, who was finally talking about her trauma, and hadn't responded to my texts all day. Sarah was unable to look at me, just continued to clutch Em's hand while scowling at me, as if I were a monster. The fact that Sarah trusted him was not the only thing that hurt. It was her eagerness to discard me. There was no hesitancy. There was no question. It happened instantly. She didn't request evidence, didn't consider how ridiculous the scenario was, didn't even think about the possibility that the man she had been seeing for years wasn't some hidden monster. She pretended to want to think the worst of me, as if rewriting our past was a simpler task than confronting the prospect that she was being duped. What's the worst? She didn't only accept it. She assisted Em. She made sure our pals heard the lies by amplifying them, made all of our connections work against me. In her view, I was more than simply guilty. She had to get rid of me entirely. And what's truly broken, do you know? Em used our entire past against me. All of the family vacations, the years we spent growing up together, and the time we spent in each other's rooms. She turned it all into something evil, gave the impression that I had been preparing something for years. Despite my repeated attempts to justify myself, everything I said only made the situation worse. I brought up how Em was the one that was always sneaking me pictures. She began to sob more and said that I was attempting to Davo her. Later, I had to look that up on Google. It seems to imply denying the attack and reversing the victim-offender relationship. At last, my father gave me a chilly look. "For what duration has this been occurring?" I went crazy. "Are you serious? Are you really thinking this? It's insane of you all to believe this garbage. Em is telling lies. She simply feels envious of college. My college fund is what she wants. A poor decision. A really poor move." Em sighed loudly and shook her head as if she felt sorry for me. I anticipated his statement. "I told you guys that he would bring up college to divert attention from his actions for precisely that reason." Kate lost it. "Well, That's a long time ago. Do you believe that this is merely sibling drama? You are aware that they have the authority to file charges for this? I had stopped even listening. My mother sat there in silence, tears streaming down her cheeks. She refused to give me a glance. Desperate, I resorted to her. You know me, Mom. Please, you are familiar with me. Before she could respond, M's entire body trembled as she gasped. Please keep him away from me. Clinging to her chest as if she were having trouble breathing, she staggered back. Then she simply fell to the ground, hyperventilating and gasping violently. To be honest, the performance was Oscar-worthy. That was my dad's end of it. Grabbing me by the shoulders, he pushed me in the direction of the door. Thunderous voice. Leave. I went cold. You're not my son, Dad. He spit. I'll box up your belongings and send them out. However, you are no longer welcome in our house. It was over in an instant. I made one final attempt to expose M's deceit. Do you want to know what my mother said to me at last? I regret having you in my life. I just had my wallet, phone, and bag when I left that residence. Lacked even a jacket. The Midwest was experiencing a fucking march. My number was banned by Sarah. In addition, I stayed in my car in a Walmart parking lot that night. I think the longest night of my life was the first night I spent in my automobile. I was wearing only my light hoodie, and the temperature was around 30°F. I kept attempting to text individuals, but I was blocked by everyone. M had done a good job. She'd even contacted my buddies who play video games online. Before I logged out, my Discord was exploding with people calling me a creep. Screenshots of M's posts about me were being sent by the few people who hadn't blocked me yet. By blogging about how she was at last able to tell her truth and how she hoped other victims of AI abuse would feel empowered to come forward, she was playing the victim to perfection. In our school, she even established a hashtag regarding AI safety that was gaining popularity. I attempted to report to work at GameStop the next morning. Yes, my previous part-time work was still with me. After giving me a quick glance, my boss informed me that they had heard about the incident and that they couldn't have someone like me working with young clients. Was immediately dismissed. The amount in my bank account has dropped to about $167. All of my money were in that college fund, which I had not yet been able to touch. A credit card? Yes. My parents had already reported it over the phone. Decrease. Thus, it was called off. They truly considered every possibility. My car, the public library for warmth and Wi-Fi, and this 24-hour McDonald's where a one-night shift worker would let me hang out if I purchased a coffee every few hours were where I spent the following several days. Marcus deserves special recognition. You saved my life those nights, dude, if you're reading this. My phone rang just as I was about to consider some very dark stuff, because I was feeling desperate. It was my mom's sister, my Aunt Paula, who lived in this small, remote village some 4 hours away. The only one who cared to inquire about my side of the story was her. I told her everything as I was sitting in the McDonald's parking lot. M's jealousy, the eye pictures, and how she set me up were all part of it. And what do you know? She did pay attention. As in, actually paid attention. She wasn't only waiting for me to complete before expressing her disappointment. She remained silent for a minute after I had done speaking. Then she said something that will always stick in my memory. I think you're real. I completely lost it. Broke down in tears in the parking lot. Until then, I hadn't sobbed during the entire ordeal, but I was just broken by those 3 words. Paula instructed me to wait, and she will come fetch me. Said that she had to first perform a shift at the hospital. She would drive down immediately after working as a nurse. I requested an extension of 12 hours, 12 of the longest hours of my life. I was afraid that she would somehow find out and be prevented from attending. I was always thinking that I was being watched by everyone. These advertisements concerning AI technology started popping up on the McDonald's Wi-Fi, which greatly confused me. Paula's ancient Subaru finally rolled into the parking lot at around 2 in the morning. She gave me a quick glance, wore the same clothing and hadn't taken a shower in days. Most likely just gave me a hug while looking like complete trash. Didn't pose inquiries, didn't pass judgment, simply gave me a hug. For the journey back, she had given me a pillow, some food, and a warm sweater. She got me some cash when we stopped at an ATM. Later on, she discovered that she needed to use her personal funds for that, the entire journey back. She played music from the 1990s as she let me sleep, very silently. Do you recall that I mentioned M's proficiency with social media? By the time we arrived at Paula's house, she had somehow discovered that I was leaving town and had blogged the entire incident. Sarah even said on social media that she was relieved the truth was revealed before it was too late because of my guilt. My phone was just taken by Paula, who then locked it in a drawer, stated that I should concentrate on living for the time being. Social networking could wait. She gave me a room in her spare. It seemed like a palace, despite having only a desk and a twin bed. After spending the night in my vehicle, do you know what the truly problematic aspect is? M has already visited Paula's home when on family vacations. I believe her vengeance dream did not include the tedious bit where her victim had to really survive afterward, but she understood exactly where I was heading. It was difficult during those initial months at Paula's. Really harsh, like I essentially turned into a recluse. I spent most of my days in that spare room just looking at the ceiling, trying to understand how my life had fallen apart so quickly. Even though Paula would bring me food, I hardly ever ate. In the first month alone, I lost almost 20 pounds. The nightmares were the worst. Remember, I was raised on social media, right? I was always online, just like everyone else my age. However, I would now experience a panic attack if I saw a phone camera. I kept thinking that M was watching and that everyone was filming me. I was certain that M could somehow get into Paula's laptop camera, so she had to cover it with tape. Throughout it all, Paula was a true angel. She made sure to check on me during the day, even though she worked night shifts at the hospital. Began taking these sporadic novels home from the library. In retrospect, I believe she was attempting to demonstrate to me that I still had hope for the future. Paula sat me down for a serious conversation after about 2 months. Said that although I could be with her for as long as I needed to start living my life. She couldn't stay hidden in her spare room indefinitely. She was correct. However, the thought of having to face the world once more was horrifying, man. She brought this flyer for the nearby community college home the following day. It included computer science and night sessions. Isn't that ironic? I might be able to reconstruct my life with the same technology that M used to ruin it. Paula volunteered to cover the cost of tuition, discovered later. For this, she obtained a little loan. Do you still feel bad about that? This is when things start to become a little dull, but in a nice way. I enrolled in these rudimentary courses. As it happened, I was really good at it. My past was unknown to the teachers, didn't regard me as a monster of any sort. Being treated like a regular person once more was pleasant. I also got a job at this neighborhood computer repair company. Mike, the proprietor, was an elderly man who didn't care about drama or social media. All that mattered to him was whether or not you could fix computers. It wasn't much money, but it was something. In addition, I was gaining practical skills. I began establishing a regimen for myself. Throughout the day, work at the shop, night classes. When Paula worked night shifts, she would put meals in the microwave for me. We would occasionally meet up for brunch. I just got home from courses that started late. She was just rising for work. I would study as she worked on her crossword while we had coffee. The frequency of panic attacks decreased. Began going to the grocery shop without giving it any thought. I had everyone's attention. Even got to know some people at school. Not pals. That's right. More like individuals with whom I might collaborate on projects without being anxious. Later on, I discovered that M was still sometimes writing about me. She had created an entire story about how I had gotten away with my crimes and was most likely still doing them somewhere. But what do you know? People were paying less attention to her posts. They were switching to fresh drama. Later, I discovered that M was still sometimes blogging about me. She had created an entire story about how I had gotten away with my crimes and was most likely still doing them somewhere. But what do you know? People were paying less attention to her posts. They were switching to fresh drama. I allowed myself look for the first time in months. So I knew. Not right away. Absolutely not. Through a public Twitter discussion featuring an old classmate who was being ridiculed for being a clout chaser, I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction she deserved. One of her dramatic survivor postings was linked, and the comments were harsh. Hold on, wasn't this previously disproved? Someone made a remark. Girl, just say that if you need money, remarked another. Then I came to the one that truly chilled me to the bone. Didn't her family give her a lot of money for college, according to a random account? What became of that? I made a click. A screenshot of M's previous post from just after everything went down was the biggest error hidden among the answers. She was finally receiving the help she was due, according to a lengthy, meandering caption. Someone else sent a comment along with a photo of her admission letter to some posh out-of-state university. Her relative was expected to attend college, right? How did his fund fare? My stomach dropped as I sat there, gazing at the words, knowing exactly what had transpired. I simply didn't want to acknowledge it to myself. My father had said, "You are not my son," the day I was expelled. And I suppose he meant it since they handed her my college fund, rather than conserving it for me, or even simply leaving it in the account. The whole $80,000. She snatched my future and burned it all down. For what purpose? Clout, high-end purses, a phony influencer job. Paula must have noticed my expression since she removed my phone from me with gentleness, but I'm not sure how long I sat there. She said, "You don't have to do this to yourself." However, it was too late. The harm was already done. Paula assisted me in setting up a new phone number, email, and everything else. To start over, not to conceal. This one burner email address was the only thing that connected me to my former life. I occasionally checked in case somebody from my past was interested in hearing my version of events. Nobody ever did. The strange thing is that I began to feel somewhat better, not quite content, but stable, began to understand how I truly operate in my classes. More about digital forensics, including how to identify phony photos. Even though it was too late to support my argument, it felt nice to comprehend everything. I remember sitting with Paula and watching a dumb cookery show about the time I was a year old. We were both eating takeout pizza since we were fatigued from work and school, and I came to the realization that this was my life. Tiny, keep quiet, dull, but mine. No drama, no celebrity on social media, simply being there. However, my parents then made an effort to get in touch with me. Emails were the first thing. Similar to several emails. Subject lines like, "Please read this and we need to talk," were the first ones from my parents. And we committed a grave error. I paid them all no attention. Paula also saw them. On her tablet, I occasionally forget to check out of my email, and we share Netflix. Then they began phoning Paula all the time. At first, she didn't inform me. When I was finally feeling better, I didn't want to tamper with my head. However, she sat me down with this serious expression on her face one evening after her shift. It turns out that Mom made an extremely bad mistake. My parents gave her a college money, do you recall? In less than a year, she did indeed blow through it. The crazy thing isn't even that. After just one semester, Mom left college and told my parents she was taking classes online. But in reality, she was using their money to try her hand at being an influencer. Purchased shouts and followers. For her, the full want-to-be-famous bundle was insufficient. She began acting in the same way that she had with me. This time, however, she specifically targeted my dad and made up an entire false narrative about how he had behaved inappropriately against her, complete with artificial intelligence-generated proof. Claimed that he had been purchasing her silence with the college funds. But the bit that's truly screwed up, on this occasion, she was careless. I believe I became too confident. Began showcasing the AI-generated content to those who were really familiar with the technology. Someone brought out the unmistakable indicators of AI manipulation. You are familiar with the little bugs that programs leave behind. They didn't stop there, though. She lost it when my dad stopped giving her money. Began sharing all of this information about him online in an attempt to get him canceled or something. Even made an attempt to engage my mother, claiming to be aware of everything. This is the point at which karma appeared. Em was unaware that detecting technology had advanced much in the 2 years after she pulled this stunt on me. After looking at her proof, an IT specialist my dad recruited for his company saw all the indications that AI was controlling the entire deck of cards. Began to disintegrate. People began to doubt her account. After that, they began to reflect on what she had done to me. The original, unedited copies of several of her images were even uploaded when someone discovered earlier cached versions of her social media postings where she had made mistakes. In addition to being distraught by what Em was doing to them, my parents were also devastated by their eventual realization of what they had done to me. They discovered that Paula and I shared a residence. Em began attempting to get in touch with me. After telling everyone that I had left the country, Paula showed me every communication they sent. They were a complete mess. My mother was experiencing panic episodes. Dad had trouble falling asleep. Their goal was to put things right. To make amends for their actions, they will stop at nothing. To be honest, I was relieved that they were in pain. What a disaster that is. Although I was happy that my own parents were experiencing some of what I had, I felt nothing at all, and reading their frantic texts no longer even infuriated me. I essentially didn't know them right now. Paula suggested that I speak with them. I didn't want to go on, but they said it may help. I had created this new existence for myself. Without all that turmoil, without them, why should I allow them to ruin that? Then Em arrived at my parents' house in tears and said she needed assistance, said she would make amends, and apologized for getting carried away. In fact, my parents began to trust her once more. Do you think that's possible? I made the decision to return at that point. Not for closure, not for them, or whatever nonsense people say. I returned because I was tired of allowing her falsehoods to ruin people's lives. I kept my arrival a secret from everyone. Paula helped me organize things, but she thought I was insane. By then, I knew enough about technology to be competent. I started by purchasing one of those little covert cameras, just a simple one with audio and video recording capabilities. I tested it with Paula's help to make sure it wasn't too evident. Just in case, I also configured my phone to capture backup audio. Paula informed me that Em was once more residing at my parents' place, performing the entire performance of the remorseful cousin. She continued to post on social media about her healing process or whatever, but now she was including ambiguous statements regarding my dad's improper behavior. Classic Em is retaining all of her choices. I knew my folks would be at work, so I picked a Tuesday afternoon to arrive. Wanted them out of the way yet. After everything, it was strange to meet her face to face when Em opened the door. She was wearing these pricey clothing and had altered her hair. Most likely purchased with my college funds, but that deceptive expression in her eyes was just that. She made an effort to look surprised, began performing her entire shaky victim act. However, I simply stood there composedly. Coming in are 2 years of treatment. Clutch, I suppose. I wanted to talk, I said. That's all. Just chat, no screaming, no accusations. She attempted to indicate she was going to contact the police, but I believe she became alarmed by my composure. She opened the door for me. We were sitting in the kitchen, the same space where we had done our schoolwork as children. I simply let her speak, permit her to dig her own tomb, watched her narrative unravel while asking her basic questions. The finest aspect? In fact, she told it all. She was proud of it, not because she felt bad about it. She told me straight out that she did it because she was able to, as it was too simple. Said that certain Discord servers taught her all there is to know about AI technologies. Months were spent organizing everything. After that, she began boasting that no one could prove anything and that she was going to do the same to my dad. My word is against his, and the victim is always believed. At that point, I pulled out my phone and listened to the final 30 seconds of our chat. I wish I had a photo of her face at that precise time, you guys. In just 0.2 seconds, she changed from feeling proud to feeling afraid. I had previously backed everything up to the cloud when she attempted to take my phone. That method was something I picked up in my IT studies. She broke down, but not in the way she usually does. Very horrible sobbing, pleading with me, not to show anyone. According to the tape, she made up everything about me and even offered to divide the remaining funds from the college fund, which was completely depleted. I just texted my folks to come home without saying anything. We were seated there when they arrived, 20 minutes later. I stopped them from having a total breakdown, played the entire tape for them. Everything. I acknowledged that she made up the first charge, boasted about the AI pictures, and had intentions to harm my dad in the same way. Everything. My mother vomited. I literally vomited up after running to the restroom. My dad sat there as if everything in his universe were falling apart, which I suppose it was. Em made one final attempt to control the circumstance, began claiming that she needed treatment, not punishment, and that she only did it because she was traumatized by the loss of her father and the abandonment of her mother. The entire "we're family" card was pulled. We're not relatives, I told her, staring her in the eyes. We weren't. I then forwarded the tape to her mother, my relatives, her friends, and everyone who had blocked me 2 years prior. I then forwarded it to the college. She stopped talking about how she had defrauded my parents of the tuition money. The results were essentially what you would have expected. When Em's mother eventually arrived, She informed her that she was interrupting her. My parents attempted to file charges, but there wasn't much legal support because, in theory, M had never demanded money from them. Instead, she had tricked them into doing so. My parents pleaded for pardon, pleading. But what do you know? I was unable to provide it to them. I couldn't. Perhaps that makes me a horrible person. I told them that although I no longer hated them, I also didn't want them in my life. The last I heard, M works in retail and lives with some odd housemates. No one wants to interact with her on social media, despite her attempts to restart. It turns out that people dislike learning that they were duped. I returned to Paula's residence, returning to my tranquil life, my IT studies, and my tiny group of new acquaintances who are unaware of or indifferent to my history. Though they are becoming less regular, I still occasionally have nightmares involving cameras and myself. Paula advises me to take pride in the way I manage things, claims I received justice without turning, becoming one of them. I'm not aware of that. Sometimes I'm not sure if I'm better or worse than her since I exposed her. But what do you know? I am at liberty. Really? In the right way. I can no longer be harmed by M, not able to harm anybody else. And that's sufficient. Edit. Holy cow. This went viral. Go through my inbox. Second, edit. I appreciate all the rewards, but please don't spend too much money. Instead, make a donation to groups that support victims of online abuse. Third edit. Yes, I nearly forgot. After the recording became viral, Sarah got in touch, sent me a lengthy, heartfelt note expressing her regret for not believing me, her daily thoughts of me, and her want to get back in touch and make amends. She also said that she is currently single. I didn't read her. If she's unmarried, that's great. I'm already in love with a stunning woman who even Paula finds attractive, and life is amazing for anyone experiencing a similar situation. It improves. Better, perhaps, but not flawless. Believe me,